afternoon, all. This lovely taste of spring day. This is an event that we have been waiting for since this fall. Carol Brown Goldberg, as you remember, introduced and interviewed her friend Diane Rehm. And at that event, she promised us that we will also have an event with her and take a peek in her studio. As you know, she's a very well-recognized artist. So to our help today, we have asked Dr. Aneta Georgievska-Shine, who is our art professor at Maryland and helps us to tour museums and guide us in the world of art, to interview Carol. So here is a thought. Where does Carol get her amazing inspiration from? So Carol and Aneta, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gunilla, for this opportunity to converse with Carol Brown Goldberg, one of the distinguished artists in Washington area, known both locally and internationally. Thank you, Carol, for agreeing to have this conversation today and to make it possible for people from the Somerset community to learn more about you as an artist as well as a collector. So the way we envisioned this is as a conversation illustrated by a number of different images. But before we go there, I would like just to ask Carol Brown Goldberg herself to say a few words before I formally introduce her.
Well, thank you, Aneta, and thank you, Gunilla. It's a pleasure to be here and to share our private collection and its influences on my work, and to talk about the concept of entanglement as I see it. So thank you, Aneta.
Well, thank you, Carol. And I would just like to take a few minutes to mention a few important aspects of Carol's career, even though she does not need introduction in this community. But Carol Brown Goldberg has been active for several decades as an artist and as somebody who thinks a lot about art and teaches art as well whenever she has an opportunity. She has shown her work both nationally and internationally. And some of the venues include the Katzen Art Center at the American University, the Frost Art Museum in Miami, Florida, the Phillips Collection in Washington, the Conarte Museum in Monterrey, Mexico, and many others. And she's of course represented in a number of different museum collections. They include the Vero Beach Museum of Art, the Krieger Museum in Washington, New Orleans Museum of Art, the Gabaron Foundation Museum in Valladolid, Spain, and the National Museum of Women in the Arts, among others. And of course, since I mentioned that she also likes to teach, and we had a chance to talk about that a little bit before this presentation, as Carol said, you always learn so much from teaching, and she has taught at the American University. She has taught at the Chautauqua Institute in the context of residencies there, and she has been a guest lecturer at a number of other institutions in this area, as well as more widely in the United States. So with that introduction, I would now like to perhaps proceed to our conversations with images, but I need to mention one more thing, that Carol Brown Goldberg, despite our COVID situation, currently has an art exhibition on view at the Grimaldi's Gallery in Baltimore, Maryland. So thank you again, Carol, for accepting this invitation, and thank you, Gunilla, for organizing this event. And now I just believe that we can start with the screen sharing and perhaps start with our conversation too. And when Carol prepared this presentation, these slides, she decided to begin with this painting. So I would like to ask you, Carol, to tell us a little bit more about this work.
This work, called Maggie on My Mind, was a piece that I did after that connects with my early work. the early work between 1970 and 1985. After 1985, my work, I took it a right turn or a left turn into abstraction and into forms and geometry and architecture. And that began to give me a language, another language to work with. Following that, I worked with the concept of light in color by doing 10 years of circle paintings. I did that by day, and at night I would sketch in my apartment. I would sketch works on paper, and they were always foliage. It was always starting with a line on the bottom of the page and making that line rise up and entangling with another line. But the work is very similar to my early work, but there was a new raison d'etre for this work. So I started with this because this really begins the period since 2015. I had to look in when I did it. So it starts the most recent period of work, which I've called entanglement.
Entanglement, and it's a quite large and ambitious composition, as are many others of your works.
Yes.
Recently, and also way back when you started out as a painter, you were always interested in working on large scale,
Yes.
as well as small scale. How does the large scale in this composition contribute to the meaning of that entanglement?
Entanglement is a large word. It's working on a large scale comes very naturally to me, very natural. I had to teach myself to work small. In the slideshow, you'll see very small works, 8 inches. And in teaching, I like doing that juxtaposition with students to work large and small and to change what you're looking at so that the tree becomes small. The human being becomes giant as the tree. I just like playing with forms. It's play. It's play. But this piece took a very long time. And with this piece, Klaus Ottman, who is a wonderful curator at the Phillips Collection, had a project called One-on-One, where he would go into the community to an artist's studio and pick a piece from their studio and juxtapose it with something from the Phillips Collection. So he came to the studio, and I thought he'd be picking a geometric piece that I'd been working on, that I'd been working in that ilk for years. And he picked this piece and he paired it with the Matisse. And that was like a little secret, because when I jumped into art in the 70s, Matisse was my hero, my favorite artist. But most people were interested in minimalism and not elaboration, not bright colors. It was a time of earthworks and conceptual art. So I was a little embarrassed to love Matisse so much, but it came out when I had this show at the Phillips, and the two pieces were put side by side. So you can see it in this room, which kind of surprised me because my image of Matisse is so big, so huge, and it felt way too small. He should be bigger than me. Should be bigger than me. But the two pieces, I think, talk to each other. I mean, many of my pieces talk to other artists. They just are in my memory, and I use them all the time without being conscious of it. It's almost through osmosis.
Yes, it's a wonderful juxtaposition. It's brilliant visually and conceptually. And I'm curious to know, when Klaus Ottman suggested the pairing with Matisse, were you surprised at all?
I was so surprised that I had no title for that painting. I mean, that painting was behind other paintings. You know, I've always heard stories about that, but that it wasn't quite behind it, but it was not so prominent. And he said that was the painting. And he called me from, I think, the subway to say that he knew what he was going to pair it with. And he said, what is the title? And I hadn't had one until he left the studio. And I looked across the room and I thought, Maggie on my mind. So that was, that came very quickly.
It's wonderful, wonderful comparison. And while we still have it on screen, perhaps this gives you an opportunity to speak a little bit about what it was in Matisse that you love and that you subconsciously essentially have assimilated, have turned it into part of your own visual language.
Yeah. Well, the first thing about Matisse are the colors. And actually, and what makes the colors special to me is the use of black in Matisse. I don't think I've ever done a painting that doesn't have black in it, if it has more than one color. Black is, I don't know how it evolved, which is why Léger is also one of my heroes. The use of black next to color intensifies the color, of course, and just makes it richer. So that's one thing I liked about, that was the most obvious thing I liked, were the colors and use of black. The second aspect, which I'm only learning now, is his use of the window. The use of the window in Matisse, where he combines the complexity of the particular leaves in the outside of this window. He juxtaposed, there's that word again, it's right brain, left brain, putting them together and juxtaposing everything. So he juxtaposes it with the simplicity of a table and lemons and the black around the window. So the opposites of each of both aspects intensifies each aspect, that the simplicity next to the complexity.
Wonderful. May I just show briefly this painting, even though we will go back to it, because you mentioned the window and because this is an important painting in your new exhibition.
Yes, yes. This painting was all red. The whole thing, there was no window and there was no color but red, and then black entanglement that a little hard to see.
Sorry. Yes, we lost it a little bit for a moment, but I will find it again. One moment, please. Yes, so the painting, yes, here it goes.
So that painting was a large white canvas. And I looked at it and I thought, if I'm going to tackle an 8 by 9 foot canvas or 7 by 8 foot, I need to look at more color now. I've been doing many white paintings, so I just painted it red. I knew that would enliven me. So the whole painting was red. In the middle of doing this painting, after about 8 months of working on it, I fell and broke my wrist and had to stop working on this painting. So I went back to it about 5 months later. And when I went to it, I opened up the Matisse book. By now, this painting was burning in my brain, the imagery of it. I couldn't wait to get back to it. And this was one of my favorite paintings that's in the Hermitage, the Red Room. And when the entire painting was red, it was bothering me. So I went to Matisse to teach me what to do to break up this red. And his window is what I was inspired by. So I put a window in the big red painting. And then I followed a lot of the fluidity of his line and the kind of French curves that he had.
Yeah, this is fantastic. I mean, these two together talk so well to one another. So I'm absolutely not surprised that Klaus Ottmann also thought of these two paintings together. So
Yeah.
there is that Matisse way of looking at reality,
Right.
where things are both organic and geometric, where you have both a sense of three-dimensionality and flatness and two-dimensionality, where you have ornamental and something that looks very like alive, organic, real, almost naturalistic at times. It's really amazing. And all the bright colors, the black accents, the lines. So these are very, very important formal considerations. So I'm curious as we move on, perhaps, since you talk so much about color, you
Yeah.
also have this incredibly important body of work where you try to restrict yourself to black and white with certain accents.
These,
So,
sorry, yes.
no, please, please.
So I love working on paper. This is handmade paper from Oaxaca and Toledo, a really amazing painter, artist who lives in Oaxaca, has a workshop where he makes paper and uses the indigenous peoples there to help create this paper. So I bought a sketchbook um, and I tore out the paper, and then I started working on these small pieces using pen and ink. I love pen and ink. I mean, the materials I use, I really love. Very passionate about them. So I'm not ready to stop working just because it's time for dinner. So after dinner, I will pull a table up and my husband and I will watch. Now we're really Mr. and Mrs. TV watchers, but we've been, before the pandemic, um, that will stop in a second. Sorry.
Okay.
Before the pandemic, I would go back into my apartment just as a change of environment and work on a tabletop. And I would do works on paper with pen and ink. So yes, I love working.
Yes, you placed these images next to the painting that was at the Phillips because you wanted to talk also about the small scale clearly and also about the selective color emphasis that you introduce in some
Right.
of the areas to speak about the entanglement or the patterns.
Right.
But you also have images that are quite monochromatic or are just essentially a study in black and white. And this is a marvelous example, this Thank You, France, from
Right.
2016.
Right. My wonderful gallerist, Ramon Osuna, who passed away last year, um, gave me a book from the 1800s. I'm so sorry I don't even have that book now, but it was incredible prints, incredible prints of jungles and forests and landscapes, very unlike anything I was doing when he gave me the book. Maybe it was like my works on paper, but so that's the first time I got this idea that what I was doing, pen and ink, very spontaneously, just letting my hand roll across the paper. I was having a show and the, oh good, you can see.
I'm focusing a little bit on some areas while you're talking, which is
Right.
thanks to technology, yes.
Right. So I was talking to the curator, Claudio Rodriguez, and we were talking about how exciting it is to use pen and ink and just let your hand move across the canvas. Not the canvas, sorry. It's important to say the paper, because I had done no canvases like that, using a kind of automatic drawing and not planning where I'm going, just letting my mind, letting my hand sort of be the spontaneous tool that creates every form. And he said, Carol, there's a big white canvas leaning against your wall, do the pen and ink pieces on that canvas.
Which is why you have this acrylic pen.
And that's why I used an acrylic pen, because the thought of doing brush and paint was out of the question. So I found acrylic paint in a pen, and that was it. I just, again, fell in love with this tool, this implement, and made 3 big pieces. I called this Thank You, Franz, for Franz Klein. And
Takes us here to this.
Right.
Yes.
And Franz Klein is part of our collection, not the large Franz Klein that he's known for, the big white canvases with splashes of black paint across it. When Hank and I started collecting, and we never called it collecting, I never called myself a collector, that seemed to me did not go to being an artist, and I was hugely sensitive to that aspect of my life. Keep that the artist part, and the artists I knew, of course, most artists are collectors, but we had the opportunity to go shopping in New York with Joe Hirshhorn, and he sort of and he sort of pushed us in, that didn't push us, introduced us to people that I had just known in art history. And to be able to buy this work and live with it has been, I mean, a great gift. There are a lot of gifts I feel I've gotten.
Yes. This is beautiful as well, but I think that the Matisse and your piece may be easier to grasp for people formally. So I would like you to comment a little bit more, since you call it Thank You, Franz. What was it in Franz Klein, especially in this early work, for example, or in Franz Klein's language in general, that you learned?
Well, I was going from color to black and white. And to do a huge canvas this size, where I'm just using a marker, an acrylic marker, to create the forms, was a big change. And I don't feel like I'm in this by myself. I am entangled with everyone I've studied, and I'm entangled with the history of art, with days way past, way beyond, as well as my own. I mean, the entanglement is with artists that have inspired me.
Yes, and in that sense, you also have another work that you call Thank You, Ad. And maybe we can tell people what you have in mind.
So I have in mind Ad Reinhardt, which is another piece that we own, this Ad Reinhardt. And I mean, when Ad Reinhardt is a painter's painter, because any painter who looks at this, or anybody who looks at this who knows about brushes, can see the number brush he used to create his imagery. And so I honored that he actually, Ad Reinhardt, may have been the first contemporary artist I had heard of. My father used to take us to the National Gallery in Washington. Living in Baltimore, that was a Sunday outing, and most of the artists were not living. All of them were not living. And he went up to New York, and he was in the Met or MoMA, and he came home, and I remember him saying, I must have been 12. He said, I just saw paintings that were all black. They were black. Can you imagine that? Black paintings. And I don't know why I remember that comment that he said, but maybe it gave me permission that art is anything, and or whatever you choose it to be.
Yes. Is there something about this work where you say Thank You, Ad, that relates more specifically to some of these recognitions, or the way in which perhaps you play with positive negative space, with the void versus the extreme pattern? we've talked in the past about, you know, all over paintings versus paintings that leave some space open.
Yes, the space open more in my piece than at Reinhardt's. Um, it really is a nod to Chinese and Japanese painting. Painting that uses space as an object, that the actual white becomes an object. In Japanese paintings, and I used to spend my
Like here too.
here
Yes.
as well. And the Freer and Sackler, I love all the museums for sure, but the Freer and Sackler really, my perception and their work connected. I connected with the Freer, the Sackler, the Persian art, the Turkish art, not the Western perspective, the 3-point perspective, but rather one object behind another object behind another that shows you the depth. A very simplistic way of showing the pictorial space, but
Yes.
but something universal, something that has always talked to me. I don't know if it came from my parents had little Chinese paintings and Japanese paintings, and but my eye really loves this work. And then learning about physics, there is no empty space. And had a great dialogue with somebody who sent me an email saying, wait, you don't believe there is empty? And I think, no, that's right. I do not believe there is empty. We can't see what's in what we call empty. But because of the brilliance of man's technology, we now have an electron microscope. We now have the Hubble telescope. We have MRIs. So we can see there is no empty space. There is matter everywhere. And the Reinhardt actually reminds me of that kind of active particles banging into particles.
There is no negative space. As it turns out, I'm just reading now about Chinese poems and understanding of space. And it deals exactly with these issues, that what we call negative space or the nothing is the generative primal space and primal matter that becomes then forms. And this goes back to ancient Chinese philosophy, of course.
Yes.
So it's really important, yes, what you're mentioning, which leads me to the next image that you have here, which we can relate to your fascination with Asian art as well.
Right, right. With the rectangular, the Chinese, the Oriental screen. Yeah, so I did quite a number of these rectangle pieces. Now when I look at it, I juxtaposed it. I always thought, wait, did I make those petals so big? Why are the petals so large? They take up the composition. It speaks too much of flowers. And I felt, like the tomboy in me had to come out, or something. It was too feminine for me in a way. So I looked at the collection, and I looked at Leger, which is, I guess, the next slide, because I think of Leger, who it's so amazing to learn from these people, these artists. Leger, who was dealing with workers and toughness and the working class. In the middle of his painting, he has these floral images. I think I've absorbed them also. All of this is unconscious. Aneta, I didn't say, oh, I'm going to take a flower of this and put it here. It's quite amazing that our unconscious picks up so much and overlays it with, whether it's imagery or poetry or...
Absolutely, which is so important when you think about what you grow up with, what surrounds you, what you have been looking at for 20 years, it gets into your brain and is remembered, and you never know how it's going to come back. As
Right.
you were saying once in this context, how as a child you were fascinated by the patterns on Oriental rugs,
Right.
for
Right.
instance.
Right. Exactly.
And some of those patterns came back.
Right. The patterns repeat themselves. I mean, you know, we've talked about this. We love memory. Memory. It's like a treasure chest of small crystals of history. And we can do whatever we want with it. And this piece, yeah, it's the pattern. And I was working on red to 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 get out of the black and white. I did so much black and white, so I was hungry for red. And I think you pointed out its connection to the piece that we have, this Picasso piece, and the red curling lines, the circular lines. I mean, I've looked at both for years and never put the two together. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I just, you know, there is such an exuberance in both of them. They're both very Bacchic.
Yeah.
They're both about poetry and joy and happiness. And in Picasso's case, I mean, that little flute player, the woman, the
Right.
man, the creative genius there, Picasso himself on the right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, he was definitely a creative genius and went out too far in many directions. And he was, but the amount of work he did also inspires me. The production he had, I always use as, it's like a little carrot up above me, that the amount of work one can do. It's how you use your time. So anyway.
How you use your time. And just one more point, since I see them side by side now, the piece, what it shares or what it picks up from Picasso is also that interesting balancing between structure and something automatic. On the one hand, something that is conceived, you know, and controlled as a structure. On the other hand, it really gets life of its own. The way in which those curls around the figure of the artist appear.
Right.
In Picasso's piece. And you work both in a controlled manner and in almost automatic, surrealist, subconscious manner. So that's very interesting aspect of your work.
You know, I never, like many painters, unless you're dealing with realism and you've got the object right in front of you. But I don't know where I'm going, and I had to do quite a few paintings to know what it was saying to me, or I'm saying to myself, or what is it I'm trying to say. And so much has to do with spontaneity and science, and that our eyes are fairly primitive senses, that there is so much that exists that we don't have the sensory perception. We have to rely on technology. We can't see that small. So I would listen to lectures and books on tape while I painted. And if it's a lecture, if it's a talk, a David Reich's book on DNA, and he would talk about organelles and the structure of the cell, and what I was making my marks as tiny as I heard the description of the form.
What about these marks here?
Yes, this is when I broke my hand, right? Broke my wrist. Return of the DNA. Yeah, this is a small piece, and as I said, I was in the middle of that very large red painting when I had my hand in a cast, and then I had surgery. So my right hand was pretty out of commission. So I walked in the studio and thought, this is the first time in my since I've been 30 that I can't paint when I really want. And I thought of the Cobra School, who I've always admired the Cobra School, and we have quite a few paintings from that period. This is Cornet. And I thought about the Cobra School, Cobra being Copenhagen, Brussels, and Amsterdam. And it was a very short-lived period, 1948 to 52. And they wanted to bring art back to Europe. It was after the war.
Another one by Corneille, yes.
Exactly. And they use these bright, what I call crayon colors, very vivid primary colors. And I decided, I'm going to start with that. So I took a tube of paint and squeezed it on the paper, these small pieces of paper, and just let the paint drip and drop and go where it went. Some of it went off the paper, and it's acrylic, so it's plastic. It's stuck to the table. I used a spatula to get it up because I love the idea that the paint went off the paper. And when the paint was dry, and when I was able to use my right hand, I used a pen and went back in and made these tiny interconnections. It wasn't exactly the same as foliage or the concept of a jungle landscape, but it was continuing with the interconnection of line. And as that represents our interconnection with each other and the energy of particles and atoms, electrons, what we can't see. And I just thought, you know, that's who we are. We are bundles of energy, even though we don't feel like it most of the time. And
so
that's what
was it in Corneille? What was it in Corneille's aesthetic? I mean, you were obviously drawn to this artist because you have several of their works.
Yeah.
So here is another one which I found.
Right.
Jokes. Yes.
Right. I met Corneille in Paris in, I don't remember when, the 80s maybe, or the 70s. And he was, I think he was 75 years old and had these bright rosy cheeks and white hair. And he had a very young wife. I think she was 25 and full of, I mean, it was a very great experience to meet him. He was cheerful and jolly, and everything was funny and fun to him. And his paintings exuded that. And he was a lovely person to meet. So Hank and I bought a couple of his paintings because he just had a great, joyful spirit. And he was capturing the joy of childhood, which is what most artists at least had tried to do.
Yes, yes.
So
and that leads me to the title of your work, Clock Hands Turn to Yesterday.
Oh, right, right. Yes. So I never titled them till they're all finished and they're ready to be archived. And when I'm forced to, when Julie now, like, I know you hate to do it, but you've got to title these pieces. So I just, so I sit down and go through and title based on poems or whimsical ideas, or playing with the concept of time, because it's the only thing that is a continuum in our life. We all share this concept of time. So it's a fascinating element that we all live with, we all share, we all count on, depend on. And yet we live so much of the time in our memory, in the past, which can be as alive as today. We make, you know, people make poetry, books, and films out of it. So, yeah.
Yes, I would like to just quickly show a couple of other of these works from your collection together with your own work. So for example, this Carol Appel.
Right. Carol Appel.
What prompted you to put the two of them together?
It was probably the colors, probably the energetic, it feels energetic to me. The boldness of his color and childlike quality of Carol Appel, another Cobra artist that we love. And just using his colors. Also, Carol Appel inspired a lot of sculpture that I also made.
Which I can show. And here we go with one example.
Yes, so I've done, these are one-of-a-kind bronzes, and I've done about 150 of them.
And by itself a little bit, yes.
Right, I did many small pieces. I've done some larger outdoor public pieces, but the small pieces were, I just sat at a table with found objects and let my hands, kind of like drawing with a pen, let them be spontaneous and touch objects, whether it was a cork from a wine bottle or a safety pin, and different objects that I pick up at a hardware store or in thrift shop. Remember hardware stores, yes. So I pick them up and glue them together. And the juxtaposition of disparate elements fascinated me.
Mm-hmm.
Not consciously choosing them, but feeling that everything is anthropomorphic. And I loved Attilio Salem's work because it felt as well, geometry becomes anthropomorphic, men with hats.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. So there is both Carol Appel in some ways with the whimsy, with the childlike,
Yes.
with the uninhibited and the accidental,
Right.
but also this idea of anthropomorphic but geometric, that we see ourselves in everything inevitably. Yes.
Exactly. Everywhere. We are everywhere. We see ourselves and others in everything.
Yes.
Yes.
And there is one other work that I really think that we must cover here before we open the floor for discussion.
Yes.
And because I think this is very meaningful to you as well, the relationship to Leger.
Leger was someone I didn't see, I don't think, or wasn't conscious of till I was about 18. And I saw his work in a museum in New York. And it was the first time I fell in love with an artist's work. And it didn't click to me that I could be a painter or I too could be an artist. It was not in my mentality, my upbringing, my development. I had not developed that far. My goals were very simple and short, and I didn't think in terms of what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And Leger, this particular Leger, is, I hate to use the word spiritual, but there's almost a supernatural connection between this image of Leger and our collection, because we bought this Leger. We also were in front of a gallery. The gallery in Paris, the gallery is closed. We went in the bookstore. I'm looking at the book and I see this page in the book of Leger, and behind him is our piece. And even now when I say it, I get the chills.
Mm-hmm.
There's also, as if we were meant to be together, right? This image, this painting, we bought this painting 10 years before we bought this painting. we bought a sketch of a piece. I took it out of the show because I didn't think that aspect of the um, talk was that important. But we have a sketch that that Leger wrote to. Um, it was a tiny sketch and of this particular piece, and it says to mon ami, bon voyage, and the sketch was to, oh, what's his name? Where I have to look for the sketch. The sketch was to a dealer who had left Paris during World War II. And it was 1956, and he was Pierre Loeb. It was to Pierre Loeb, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was the Pierre Loeb Gallery. It's the Pierre Loeb Gallery, and Pierre Loeb was a great gallerist in Paris, and he left and went to Cuba to get away from the Germans. And I mean, I can show you this piece because it is quite remarkable.
Wonderful.
It's quite amazing, isn't it? That
Yeah.
a decade before we got the big piece, we had this little piece.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what any of that means other than just that it was destiny.
It had to happen. It had to happen. Yes.
Yeah.
And you lived with it, and you have lived with it, and one way or the other, it finds its way into your work, one
Yes.
way or the other.
Uh,
As you mentioned here, when you place it right next to this biological locomotion, and biological locomotion, I assume, refers to entanglement and to élan vital, or to the energy in nature, to everything that continues to happen and move and change and create itself.
yes. The entanglement got my attention when I was when I really was I was kind of passionate about learning about physics on my own. I never took a physics course, but I was interested in reading about it and thinking, I need to know this before I die. I don't know if that's will happen, but it was decades ago I started reading about physics, and suddenly I read this something about John Bell and the theory of quantum entanglement. And it just completely resonated to me way back then, as this work still resonates. The concept of entanglement, that quantum entanglement is a beautiful theory, one that Einstein called spooky action at a distance. And
what is the spooky action at a distance? Just very briefly, for people who may not immediately recall it.
Right, everyone needs to know. I don't know anything about physics except what I taught myself, and that's dangerous. It's if you have a particle, positive and negative, two particles, or one particle that you split, and you have a positive and negative, and you would put a spin on the particle. Spin goes in one direction with one particle and the opposite direction with the other particle. And you take those particles and shoot them across the universe, across the room, across the city, wherever. And if you change the spin in one particle, instantaneously the other particle spin changes as well. So they're both always in opposite directions or responding to each other. And that sort of, I have to say, blew me away. And it's as it has, I think, a lot of people, but what the whole reason for going in for reading about physics was to have faith, was to get faith. And physics gave me faith in what we can't see. And that informs my art, that informs my philosophy. And and it gives me a lot of energy and faith.
Yes. So maybe we can, this is wonderful and an explanation of a very complex process. But I think you conveyed the gist of the notion of resonance. As one particle goes in one direction, how it inevitably affects another particle that may be very far away, spatially and temporally, for that matter.
Right.
And that movement both in opposite directions, but also directions that echo one another in a certain way. So in the end, that's what dialogues between artists are all about, metaphorically speaking. About that kind of resonance, like you have found with all these artists in your collection or artists you love in general over the years. So I think maybe we could allow some of the participants in our discussion to ask questions or take this conversation in another direction, perhaps.
Absolutely.
If we have any questions.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Aneta, and I'm happy to facilitate some of those. For those in the audience wishing to ask questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature or the chat feature in Zoom. First, Aneta, if you don't mind going back to the Maggie on My Mind piece, if that's easy.
Yes.
Carol, someone asked, where did the name Maggie come from?
Oh, yeah. Maggie is someone I knew. She was part of our family and raised me with my parents and my brothers. And she slept in my room sometimes and she took care of me. And she was a great human being. And I think about her. I think about her often. And when I looked at this and I thought of the garden, I thought of the beauty and sunshine and the positivity which Maggie always had. And she was not educated, but incredibly well read. And my big brother told me that. I didn't know that, but in speaking to him, he told me but she was such a good person. So I've thought about her a lot in my life.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. And while we're on this piece, I think this is a good example. Could you elaborate for this question? Could you elaborate more on the process to creating these pieces that are so intricate? How and where do you determine to start on the blank canvas or paper?
I usually start at the bottom on the big canvases because I want to get that over with because I have to get on the floor to do it. But I conceptualize the piece. I really actually conceptualize it. And sometimes meaning that I look at a blank canvas and think about how things will be subdivided. Some pieces, this canvas I outlined on this piece first, and then went back and began to paint in. And it took a long time, and the experience in itself was not as satisfying because that's when I really felt I needed to be more spontaneous to keep me interested. Because once I had the lines drawn on this canvas, then it sort of became like a coloring book and I'm painting it in. And even though I love the way it turned out, the experience was a little bit, oh gosh, I can't wait till I get this over with because it was coloring in. But with this particular, I think it's the last piece I did where I just drew the lines and then drew all the lines and then colored in, painted in.
And I believe we saw, maybe it was the next slide, the type of pen that you use for these. Could you elaborate more? Someone's asking how you can get such tiny detail. Is it is it this series of pens for our aspiring artists?
This pen, I have to give credit to Lynn Meyer, even though she doesn't know it, who is doing a mural on the wall of the Hirshhorn. And I just like honed in, what is she using? I love the line. I love it. I'm doing that. And this is the closest I got, and haven't seen her to ask her, what did you use? But I've been really happy with this. I use this point.
Mm-hmm.
I use 2 points. One is a fine, and the other is an extra fine. And they're very tiny. They're very small marks, and the acrylic black is very fluid. Comes out quite easily. I have about 100 in my studio because they'll dry out. And it's just with those 2 pens, I make the tiny marks. Again, I'm inspired to make tinier and tinier as I listen to some books on tape, so that the marks begin to embody what I'm listening to.
And as you do this, do you go with the flow and don't second guess decisions made, or do you occasionally overpaint if there's something that you're not as pleased with?
Nope. These black and white paintings, what you see is what I did. There's, in fact, at one point, one of the paintings, I thought, I can't stand doing these lines. I've got to go. What happened to the tough geometry? So I started putting geometry in the pieces, and until the little pieces, in the last piece, the small piece I did, it's all geometry. But I just don't even know. I just let the line flow. I do see the space. I have to say, I will be conscious of the space I'm making between the lines. And then I make a decision to fill that in, but I don't know where I'm going. The only thing I have an idea about is how the top will be. So I start at the bottom and go up, and then work maybe the left side, then the right side. So I know I will leave that whiteness of the canvas in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe we saw some of the sketches or the drafts on the paper. Is that another process that you use? Is the drafting process to determine, elements that you would like to include on the bigger pieces?
Well, I actually don't sketch. What this is a finished drawing that is a sketch of a finished. I mean, it is a finished piece. I don't try out things if it doesn't work. If anyone sees a mistake, I'm so happy to honor what they saw. But it's so easy when you're doing lines and your hand is always moving to just connect and reconnect, and there are no mistakes with something like this. I'm not doing it from reality. It's automatic drawing, and something the surrealists did. And it really, you're suspending the left part of your brain, and your right is just having fun. I love that what Paul Klee said, that a line is taking a pen for a walk, or his pen is taking a line for a walk, or but it's all almost the same. So these are finished. I don't really sketch anything before I work in this realm. I go right to the canvas, right to the paper.
And looking at these pieces, do you happen to have a particular background, or have done, significant studies into botany or biology that has influenced your work? Or is this something where you're more visual, you see works that include these items, these features, and that's the inspiration for you to create your pieces?
You know, I just unlocked something about that. And that was in talking to my wonderful assistant, Julie, and we just talking, having a dialogue with her is part of my life as well. That when I got to college, a place I almost did not go, my mother had to drive me out and sign me up, and I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing, but I went to University of Maryland, and and I never thought about school. I was very disorganized. I loved staying home at least once a week to play. My parents let me do that. So I love to read, but I didn't take academics seriously until I took my first course, which was botany. And I didn't realize this till recently, which is a little slow of me, I would say. But it was in taking botany that I really got excited about learning about the concept that that foliage had veins in them, and the same life force that was running through our veins was running through foliage. I don't know how I did in botany. I just remember being so surprised at how much I loved it because I never plant. I've never really had a garden that I've ever taken care of. I don't remember planting. I planted a pear tree with my kids when they were little, but I'm not into landscape flowers or botany. But when you said the word botany, um, it's a recent discovery. So, every memory is there for some reason, or it will come back to haunt one or something like that.
That's great. And someone just commented that looking at the tree trunks of some of your pieces, they have such intricate small designs. In your process, do you use magnification of any sort to get that detail, or is this all just your eyes and your hands?
Just my eyes and magnifying eyeglasses, 4 point. But sometimes I don't use them because you can look too close. But no, I don't use a magnifying glass at all. Um, it's it,
Right.
it it seems that it would be yeah, it's so interesting to hear about the people ask about the process. It's because it feels so it would feel, I have to say, this process would feel boring to me if I wasn't anchored in some kind of left-brained information. Um, and and I need both. I need the freedom with my right hand, and I need to take in information. I guess the left brain. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, and sometimes I look back, when I look back at my work and think to myself, who did that? That person must be nuts. Then I know it must be kind of a very good enough painting.
That's
But
great. Yeah. So I have two other questions here, and then I'll turn it back over to Aneta and Gunilla for any additional questions they might have before wrapping up. One question is, in terms of your inspiration, who have been some of your personal favorite artists, either known or lesser known, that have been an inspiration for you over the years?
absolutely. I have to say, when I first started painting, the people that were inspirations to me were the people I knew. Andrea Way, Sharon Anthal, these are Washington artists. These were friends, Jim Mahoney, um, I, huge inspirations, Nan Montgomery, just the people that I knew who were artists were enormous inspirations in different ways. So I learned a lot from them. And then the artists like Al Held was a big favorite of mine.
You mentioned, sorry, Carol, if I may interject, we had one more comparison that we didn't get to because it's not a work from your collection.
It's Kandinsky. Thank you, Aneta. Thank you. Because Kandinsky was probably my biggest inspiration early on and still is. So yes, Kandinsky is a giant inspiration. Kandinsky was, because of reading about Kandinsky when I was at the Corcoran, I opened up to science because he was so interested in science, and I could connect it to the spiritual because he was interested in the spiritual. And I don't know if I connected it then or later that science is the way into the spiritual for me. But a huge thank you so much. He's someone that I've loved, I've emulated, I've admired his writings, his work. So Kandinsky, 100%.
Great.
Fantastic. And last question here, and then back over to Aneta. Could you just again remind our audience how they might see the works that you've created, whether online or eventually in person? And I know there was someone also had wondered if you sell any of the pieces that you create.
Oh, they're all for sale, right? I mean, I don't keep the pieces. I'll keep them if no one else buys them or wants them. But I love people who have my work. I love my work going to other places. I have a gallerist in Baltimore, Grimaldis, who's been wonderful. And I have a wonderful gallery in Washington, Addison Ripley. And I have a website, carolbrowngoldberg.com, and I'm on Instagram, and probably I'm too much out there, but and Facebook, and anyone can reach me, call me, email me. I'm always open for that. I'm always at my studio and my computer. But yes, things are definitely, and the works are all for sale, and I have quite a few works out there, but nothing. But yes, thank you for that question.
Perfect. Thank you, Carol. I'll turn it back over to Aneta and Gunilla.
Great.
Maybe I will stop the sharing. Although I'm sure that we could continue looking at these paintings and thinking about them for a very long time.
Right.
And thank you again very much. I don't have any final questions, but as I said, we could probably continue a conversation for another hour easily.
Well, I know we could. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I just want to mention to everybody that we are very lucky in the clubhouse to have two of Carol's paintings in the lobby level. These are from your more geometric period of your time.
Yeah.
They are both big, beautiful, one in blue, one in pink. For those of you who are coming to the vaccination clinic next week, you can see them. And otherwise, when we open up the clubhouse lobby level after the pandemic, you can see them there. And I love them.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Aneta.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Such a great event. Thank you very, very much.
Good. Everyone be safe. Thank you.
Yeah. Stay safe.
Thank you all.